Okay, so got the mass air meter back on there. It's all cleaned up. I tried to put my fuel pressure gauge on here, but of course the Schrader valve keeps leaking, so just gonna leave that off for now. And I got the radiator filled up, squeezing the hoses, trying to work the air bubbles out. And I got the battery cleaned up, took both of the cables off, and got that all cleaned up, ready to go. Had it on the battery maintainer overnight. I ran that charge lead around for now, which that thing's way too small, so I gotta put something else on there. But instead of having a coil of wire sitting behind the distributor, I got it run around the core support the way it's supposed to be run. So let's see. Get that filled up. Radiator's in really good shape. So got that filled up. Oh, I gotta check the oil. Checked the oil last night. It actually looks a lot better. So, still some doo-doo in there, but definitely a lot better than it was looking. So yeah, you're ready to start this thing. Alright, so playing around with that fuel pressure gauge, I primed the pump a couple times, so plus I had the battery disconnected, so it's going to be interesting to see if this thing starts up. It's knocked the computer down, so let's see.
like it's starting to bubble out of the radiator. There we go, got some bubbles popping now. So it looks like the temperature gauge is starting to come up. I think this thing was just airlocked really bad. Some bubbles popping out of the radiator. Engine block's at about 160. Like the needle on the temp gauge is coming up. Oil pressure's holding solid. Temp gauge is coming up. So far so good. Temp gauge is coming up slowly. got kind of cool last night. It was probably like 60 degrees in the garage, so probably going to take a little while for it to heat up, but looks like the gauge is coming up steady, so it's a really good sign. Temperature gauge is up to the A on normal. Alright, it's getting warm. Block's at 170. Block's up to 180. Oil pressure's good. Temperature's still going up on the gauge. Alright, the gauge is up to M, got solid oil pressure. It's looking good. Temperature gauge is up to the R. Alright, just lost oil pressure.
Looks like it bubbled out. So I'll have to fill this coolant up. Alright, I got a little carried away. So let me give you the update. Finally got this thing to heat up. I think there was a massive air pocket in there. So what I ended up doing is I just jacked up the driver's side so that the radiator would kind of be the highest point in the cooling system. I think that helped bleed the rest of the air pockets out of there. So I'm still having issues with oil pressure. You know, when you start the car, I get an oil pressure reading, and depending on whether it's been running or not, if it hasn't been running, it'll maintain oil pressure for a couple minutes and then it'll start dipping. If I'll not really dip, but go down to 0. And if I start it up after it's been running, it'll pretty much lose oil pressure once the RPMs get under like 1200. But if I keep revving it, keep it above 1200, the pressure will jump up. So I ended up going to get a gauge because I thought, well, I don't know what's going on with these gauges. Maybe the gauges in the car are not right for whatever reason. I don't have my dash light, so I don't know what's going on with the electrical in this car. So I went and got this gauge, and I wasn't even getting 20 psi on this gauge. So I'm like, well, I don't know, did I get a bad gauge? I mean, yeah, the bottom end's making some noise, no doubt. I mean, the car's gonna need a motor. That's pretty well established, but I kind of like to drive it, you know, even with a rod knock. Just get it out there and enjoy it a little bit before I go tearing the motor out of here. So the good news is, got heat, got really blazing heat inside, you know, with the heater on. The fan's kicked on, so that's awesome news. So I think the cooling system is pretty much sorted out. So anyways, so going back to this only getting 20 psi, I thought, well, I'm gonna pull this gauge off, and you know, I thought maybe there was some kind of blockage in that little tube that the sender connects to, if I can get a view of it. But there's like a little I don't know, like a little protrusion that sticks out of the block that the sender screws into. So I thought, well, maybe there's some gunk or something in there. So I took a straw off a can of brake clean and I put some tape on it so I wouldn't accidentally ram it into the engine and lose it. So, you know, I kind of probed that in there. I mean, I didn't really get any kind of doo-doo chunks out of there. And then I took, you know, compressed air. Just kind of started blowing some air in there. So, I mean, I think that passage, I mean, it seems like it's open. And it doesn't seem like the engine's losing oil pressure, because, I mean, I would expect the lifters to start clacking real bad and all that. So, anyways, after I, you know, probe that thing out with this, I thought, well, I'm going to put the factory sender back on there instead of this gauge. So I did that, and I thought, you know, I'm also just going to swap the filter. So I pulled I took that filter off. There it is. I grabbed one of my other filters, and I filled it up with Castrol 2050. Got it as full as I can. Slapped that on there. Got the filter Maggie on there, and started it up. It actually sounded pretty decent, that initial startup with the new filter on there. So I don't know, this gauge thing's kind of got me perplexed. I mean, you either have pressure or you don't, so I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm glad I got some heat in there, so now I think the next move I'm gonna do an oil change. You know, maybe there's just some poo-poo floating around in there and it's interfering with the gauge reading. But I mean, it's pretty consistent the way it loses pressure on the gauge, so I don't really know what to think of that. But yeah, I'm really glad. You know, the water pump's solid, thermostat's solid, nothing's leaking, that's good. And you know, it sounds pretty decent besides the rod knocks. And I'm really happy these fans work. That's awesome. So I'm gonna let this thing cool down, do an oil change on it, and yeah, I hope I can get it to the point where I'm getting a solid oil pressure reading. You know, at least give me a reason to put plates on this thing and roll it for a little while. You know, probably put a motor in it next year sometime. But it'd be nice to be able to move it and all that, so yeah, do the oil change next. Alright, so I figured I'd start this thing up and show you what's going on with it. We got pressure. Idle comes down, pressure's gone. If I rev it, jumps right back up. Now if I keep just revving it, it's maintaining pressure. Right back up when you rev it. So yeah, gonna do an oil change. See what that does. All right, so here's the filter from the first oil change. It's the oil. Actually, doesn't look that bad. So, like I said, hopefully do an oil change, maybe get this, somehow magically get the oil pressure to maintain. Hopefully there's just some gunk or something in there that's got to be broken loose. Alright, did the oil change. Still having oil pressure issues, so this is basically my Hail Mary pass. This is the part that the oil pressure sender screws into. So I got this out of the block, cleaned this up, blew it out with compressed air, took the air gun and rammed it into the block and blew air in there too. I don't know if something's getting up to the sender and blocking it or what's going on, but man, this thing was a pain to get out of there. 3/4 inch, had to use an end wrench. Definitely took some time to get it off of there. This screws in basically right where that negative battery lead connects to the blocks right next to it. So, alright, it's gonna be kind of hard to see, but that's it right there. So I got it out of there, got the air gun up there, blew compressed air in there, and when you're trying to get this off, I actually dimpled the oil filter. I mean, that's fine, it's not really gonna hurt nothing, but I had to keep going back and forth between this heater hose to get a bite on it with the wrench, you know, flipping the wrench around and all that. So it's a pain, but it's not impossible. You can get it off of there. So I'll throw this back on there. Well, using an end wrench was kind of stupid because you can get a socket on there. I didn't think I could do that, but you can. So yeah, I would highly recommend using the socket. Make sure it's a 6-point. So there we go. That sender back on there. Alright, got the sender back on there. Got it plugged in. So I guess this is it. Yep, still doing it. Look at that.
Well, looks like this motor's trashed. Alright, so I started it up again. Put it in first gear. Let the clutch out. And it's holding oil pressure. It's the idle staying up. See what happens if I push in the clutch. Yep, drops down. I'll let the clutch out again. Staying up. Alright, so I've got it running in gear. And what's interesting is every time those fans kick on, that oil pressure gauge fluctuates. See if I can catch it happening. There we go. See that? Fan just kicked on. I don't know, I mean, might be something to do with the electrical, but that mechanical gauge is showing low oil pressure, so I don't know what to think of this. Alright, so here's the oil pressure gauge on my white car. You know, I just wanted to throw it on here to see if it's working or not, which clearly is. So I think that motor's just shot in the black one.